So far, we have looked at three different aspects: the context, the mapping methodology, and the approach. And in the mapping, we have really looked at the legislative framework that is enabling, as an enabler, and more so the policy framework. Unlike Korea, that has a very strong legislation on social enterprise, Malaysia took on leaving the legislative framework and enabling it through development policy agenda and providing accreditation, recognition, funding, training, and support. So it's in this context that the mapping exercise goes on to recognize the kind of organizations identified based on the legislation as well as the policy framework. Next. So the mapping exercise identified 4 categories of organizations and about 9 different organizational types. So the 4 categories are government-led initiative. A lot of the initiatives are government-led or second, private sector-led. Third is community-led initiatives. And I added on this dimension because I mentioned to you that there is an Islamic alternative dimension that is very significant and which is different from a capitalist market-driven economy towards compliance to the Sharia and Islamic principles. So I put that under faith-based because faith-based could also include other religious organizations doing collective organizing in that context. So from the 4 types, one then begins to identify 9 different organizational types. FELDA is the Federal Land Development Authority, which was providing land for the landless in the early years of the independence of Malaya. And it was largely to help rural people who were landless, so they were given plots of land to cultivate, and they have become very successful, and that is looked at. Government-linked companies play a key role while they are operating in the market as business entities. Because they are owned by the state, they also have social objectives of providing equal opportunities, especially to communities that might not be able to compete in the market area. Thirdly, for-profit companies and businesses that might have a social objective, non-profit companies and societies that have a social objective, but the legislation prevents them from doing business. But cooperatives, on the other hand, are collectives of grassroots people, but they are able to enter business and generate income. They are able to do collective saving, mobilization, and reinvestment. While there have been challenges of the cooperative movement due to governance weaknesses, overall, many cooperatives have done extremely well, and I would illustrate that. Microfinance institutions, I know the Philippines has very large ones moving into the banking sector. Malaysia, the Amanah Ikhtiar Malaysia, which is the Grameen replication of women in micro business in groups of 5, and then brought together in a center and repayment, the rates and so forth. We look at that. There is social enterprises. There is Neighborhood Watch Committee, which has the legislation, which we saw earlier, that provides for economic opportunities at the neighborhood level. And some of them have moved into cottage industry or into urban farming or other forms of income-generating projects in urban high-rise flats. Arano, which is the Islamic pawn shops, came as an alternative to market-driven pawn shops that were seen to be more exploitative in its interest rates, or where people lost the goods that they had kept as collaterals for cash and so forth. So an Islamic alternative has emerged, and it's doing well from the study and mapping exercise. Next, please. So this is the kind of mapping scheme that was used by Professor Kim that brings these features of the social feature, economic feature, the democratic feature, and puts some within SSE defined using the law and the parameter, and others as hybrid organizations that might have socio-economic indicators or economic democratic examples or social democratic aspects, but not having all the aspects of social, economic, and the democratic front. So Professor Kim developed this analysis framework that he then looked at 6 different countries. So within the Malaysian context, where this typology of organizations fits in, then it would be the social enterprises and actually the cooperative movement. And within the cooperative movement, I'm highlighting examples where the economic feature, the democratic feature, as well as the social features are prominent, and that brings out the feature as well. Earlier, we looked at the SSE framework of the 5 different aspects, and that is something that can be mapped along with this mapping exercise. Next, please. So what we are looking at is actually SSE organizations and potential, which I've then categorized in the Malaysian context as cooperatives, social enterprises, and faith-based initiatives. The Arano cooperative, with the Arano or the Islamic pawn shops, they are also run by commercial entities. But here we are looking at the cooperatives, and why these 3 organizations have certain common features. They are strong in business and they are not grant driven. There is an element of business nature. It has a social and environmental objective, and that's quite important. It's not just for profit. It has a strong business aspect for sustainability, but it has social and environmental objective. It has a strong community orientation, and that is important. Community orientation, community accountability in terms of its budgeting, its planning, and it has a strong legislative policy, financial support from government, as well as an accountability framework in that context. Next. So if you look at SSE organizations, the cooperatives, we have already mentioned 14,000 cooperatives with 6 over million, and the cooperatives are broken into 9 different categories of their core business. And this is something that could be parallel to other countries as well. The social enterprise, it has a blueprint, it has an accreditation. It used to be under MAGIC, but now it comes directly under the entrepreneurship and cooperative accreditation process. There is this study that the British Council did, which also documents this in a strong way. Next, please. So the FELDA it has a special act. It's poor land settlers. There were over 317 settlements with over 112,635 individuals participating in this project. So they then organized themselves as a cooperative, multiple cooperatives within that context. There is collective investment through the Felder Corporation, which is the bigger entity, but the settlers have the cooperatives. But they have been faced with financial skeptics and the issues of political control that we can come back to. On microfinance institution, Amana Ikhtiar Malaysia is the Grameen replication. It has over 380,000 members, and they have formed a cooperative, and their weekly savings are channeled through the cooperative, and that goes into millions. And the women do individual business, collective guarantee. I think we are familiar with this. But they also face challenges, but it's quite a key objective of sustainable micro businesses, and their cooperative plays a key role. Next. Now, the Neighborhood Watch organization is a feature not well documented, but there is an act, which is the Neighborhood Watch Act, that's largely for security and neighborhood watching. But out of the 8,000 over neighborhood watch groups, 99 of them set up income generating projects that are at a neighborhood level. So there is some potential for them to address local economic, social, and so forth. But this really requires further study in that context. And so the mapping exercise provides some idea of the organizations. And in the next part 5, I will illustrate organizational examples. So the examples are also quite important.